The first drawing appeared on a Tuesday in March, 11 days before the world ended. I remember the day because I'd just gotten home from a consultation with a divorce attorney, not mine. My wife's, and Emma was sitting cross-legged on the kitchen floor with her crayons spread around her like she was performing some kind of ritual. She was 6. She'd been 6 for exactly 3 weeks. The birthday candles were still in the junk drawer because nobody had remembered to throw them away. "Daddy, look." She held up the paper. Blue house, green grass, yellow sun in the corner, and in the center, a man. Tall, thin, standing completely still with his arms at his sides. His face was blank except for 2 dark circles for eyes and a straight line for a mouth. He was colored in gray, not black, not brown, but the specific medium gray you get when a child presses a pencil lead flat and drags it slow. "Who's that, Bug?" "The man." "What man?" "The man who's coming." I didn't think about it. You don't with kids. They say strange things the way they breathe constantly and without any particular intention behind it. I told her it was a nice drawing. I put it on the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a banana. I made us both mac and cheese because the grocery run I'd planned had evaporated somewhere inside a conversation about custody schedules and asset division. My wife, Rachel, was staying at her sister's in Gresham, which he'd been doing 3 or 4 nights a week since January. We were performing the ritual of slow separation that people perform when they have a child and no money, and a lease that doesn't expire until August. The second drawing came Wednesday. Same man, same gray, same posture, arms pinned at his sides, eyes like 2 dark wells. But this time, the background was different. No house, no grass. Just the man standing in what appeared to be a road, with little rectangles on either side that I took for cars. "Bug, is this the same guy from yesterday?" "Mm-hmm. Does he have a name?" "No, he doesn't remember it." That sentence sat in me strangely. Not because it was alarming, but because of how naturally she'd said it. Like she was reporting something she'd observed directly. Kids blur that line all the time between imagined and remembered, between dreamed and witnessed. I knew that. I'd read those parenting books during the 9 months before Emma arrived, back when I believed that preparation was the same thing as competence. By Friday, she'd drawn 4 of them. Same man in everyone. I started paying closer attention to the details. The figure's proportions stayed remarkably consistent for a 6-year-old. The head was slightly too large for the body. The fingers, when she drew them, were long and splayed, like he was holding something invisible apart. And in the 4th drawing, she'd added something new. A dark red mark across the man's chest, horizontal, just under where his collarbones would be. "What's the red part?" "That's where he got hurt." "Hurt how?" She shrugged and went back to drawing. I put each one on the refrigerator. By Sunday, the bottom third of the door was covered. Rachel came back that afternoon to pick up some clothes and stopped in front of them. "What's with the gallery?" "Emma's been drawing the same figure all week." Rachel studied them. I watched her face. She had the expression she wore whenever she suspected I was failing at something parental, but hadn't yet decided whether to say so. "Have you asked her about it?" "She says it's the man who's coming. She says he doesn't remember his name." "That's creepy, Marcus." "She's 6. I know she's 6. I'm saying it's creepy." She left with a duffel bag, and the conversation stayed exactly where she'd dropped it. Nothing resolved, nothing pursued. That was the texture of everything between us by then. But I started watching Emma more carefully at the kitchen table each evening. The way she drew the man, wasn't the way she drew anything else. When she drew cats or flowers or versions of our house, she was loose, happy, scribbling. When she drew the man, she got quiet, focused. She'd pick up the pencil and hold it the way I'd seen her hold a flashlight in a dark room, tight, two-handed, like the thing she was illuminating might move. 9 more days of drawings. Then the news started. It wasn't called an outbreak at first. The initial reports out of Bakersfield, California said mass disturbance. Then Sacramento said civil emergency. Then the CDC released a statement that used the word atypical 4 times in 3 paragraphs and told people to avoid unnecessary travel. I was a residential electrician. I worked for a company called Bridger and Lyle out of a shop on C. Foster. On the morning the Portland News affiliate started running continuous coverage, I was rewiring a panel box in a duplex in Selwood, and my foreman, Dale, called everybody back to the shop. He didn't say why. He just said, "Come back now." And his voice had a texture I'd never heard in it before, like he was speaking from the bottom of something. The shop had a TV in the break room. 12 of us stood in front of it. The footage was from Los Angeles, and it showed people moving wrong. That's the only honest way to describe it. Not running, not stumbling, moving with a kind of purposeful discoordination. Like marionettes operated by someone who understood anatomy, but not physics. They moved toward other people. The footage cut before showing what happened when they arrived, but the audio didn't cut fast enough. Dale said, "Go home." Everyone went home. I picked Emma up from Rachel's sister's house. Rachel wasn't there. Emma had her backpack and her crayon box and a new drawing, the man, standing in what was clearly a crowd of other figures, the only one colored in gray, while everything around him was scribbled over in black. "Where's Mom?" Aunt Jenny said she went to the store. I called Rachel. No answer. I called Jenny. She said Rachel had left 2 hours ago to get supplies and hadn't come back. I told Jenny to lock her doors. She asked me if I'd seen the news. I said yes. She asked me what was happening. I said I didn't know. Both of those statements were lies in different directions. I'd seen more than I wanted to, and I understood more than I could say out loud with my daughter in the car. We drove home. The roads were thick but moving. I could feel the collective decision happening in real time, thousands of people choosing, simultaneously, to go somewhere. Not away from anything specific yet, just somewhere. The survival math hadn't started. People were still in the phase where movement felt like action, and action felt like safety. I got Emma inside. Locked the door's deadbolt plus chain, plus the sliding bolt I'd installed on the back door last year after a break-in 2 blocks over. I filled every container I could find with water. I pulled the camping gear out of the garage. I moved the bookshelf in front of the living room window, the one that faced the street. Emma watched me do all of this without asking a single question. At 4:17 p.m., my phone lit up with an emergency alert. The words "shelter in place" sat on the screen in capital letters, as if volume could substitute for information. Below it, a list of instructions. Stay indoors. Avoid contact with symptomatic individuals. Do not approach anyone exhibiting disoriented movement patterns. The word "infected" appeared nowhere in the message. The word "dead" appeared nowhere in the message. Emma was at the kitchen table, drawing. I walked over and looked down. The gray man, same as always. But now he was standing in front of a building, and the building had a peaked roof and a cross on top. A church. And behind him, dozens of small, dark figures, the scribbled black shapes she'd been using for the crowd. But in this version, the gray man was facing them. His arms were extended outward, not pinned at his sides, palms up, like he was stopping them, or welcoming them, or both. "Bug, I need you to tell me something honestly." She looked up. "Where do you see this man?" She pointed to her forehead. "In the pictures when I sleep." "You dream about him?" "He's not a dream. He's real. He just hasn't gotten here yet." I sat down across from her. My hands were shaking. Not because of what she'd said, because of everything else. The footage, the alerts, the fact that Rachel wasn't answering. The sound I could now hear through the walls of the house if I held my breath. Sirens. Layered, overlapping, coming from every direction. And under them, something else. Something without a mechanical source. I called Rachel again. This time the call didn't connect at all. "Daddy?" "Yeah, Bug. He's almost here." The first night was noise. The second night was silence, which was worse. By the morning of day 3, I'd pushed every piece of heavy furniture against the ground floor entry points and created a sleeping space in Emma's upstairs bedroom, the one with the window overlooking the backyard. I chose it because the backyard was fenced, because the window was 12 feet off the ground, and because Emma's room still smelled like the lavender detergent Rachel used on her sheets. And I needed something in that house that smelled like normalcy. I won't describe what I saw from that window in detail. You've seen it by now, or you've heard someone describe it, or you've lived it. The way the infected moved through residential streets, like water finding a gradient, not searching exactly, but flowing toward sound, toward warmth, toward whatever signal living bodies emit that dead bodies don't. I watched 3 of them cross my backyard at dawn on day 2. Moving in a loose cluster, their heads tilted at angles that suggested the muscles in their necks no longer received coherent instruction. One of them stopped beneath Emma's window. It stood there for nearly a minute, facing the fence, motionless. Then it continued on, following the others through a gap where 2 fence boards had separated. Emma slept through it. I didn't sleep at all. By day 4, I'd inventoried everything. We had food for perhaps 2 weeks, if I rationed carefully canned soup, pasta, peanut butter, a bag of rice, 6 cans of tuna, crackers, a jar of applesauce. Water was less certain. I'd filled the bathtub, the pots, every bottle and pitcher. Maybe 5 days of water if I kept Emma hydrated and cut my own intake. The math was survivable only if I solved the water problem within the week. Rachel still hadn't called. The phone network was dead by the end of day 2. I tried texting, calling, even the old landline that I'd never disconnected because the cancellation fee was $30, and I'm exactly the kind of person who will keep paying for something useless to avoid a one-time cost. Nothing connected. The city had gone quiet in the way that large systems go quiet, not all at once, but in a cascade of small silences. The traffic lights still worked on day 3. By day 5, they were dark. The water pressure dropped on day 4. By day 6, the taps gave a groan and nothing else. Emma kept drawing. Every day. The same gray man. She'd added details I hadn't seen before. A coat with large buttons, shoes that were too big, hair that she drew as short, uneven lines, like it had been cut with something dull. And in each new drawing, the red mark on his chest grew more defined. In the latest one, she'd drawn it not as a single line, but as a narrow horizontal wound, slightly open, colored in with the dark red crayon she used for fire trucks and Valentine's hearts. "Bug, does the man scare you?" "No." "Why not?" "Because he's nice. He's hurt, but he's nice." I made myself ask the next question, even though I did not want to hear the answer. "Is he like the people outside?" She looked at me with an expression I'd never seen on her face before, patient. like I was the child who needed something explained slowly. He's not like them, Daddy. He's what's left over. I didn't know what that meant. But I wrote it down in the margin of a gas bill because I'd started keeping notes. The way you do when you've lost the ability to plan, and recording things feels like a substitute for understanding them. I wrote down everything she said about the man. I wrote down dates, details, the specific elements of each drawing. I think I was building a case not for anyone else, but for myself. Evidence that my daughter was not losing her mind. Evidence that I was not losing mine. On day 7, the water ran out. On day 8, I made the decision to leave the house. On day 9, we met him. Moving through a dead city with a 6-year-old is not what you'd expect. You imagine carrying her, running, ducking behind cars. The reality is slower, quieter. The pace set not by threat, but by the length of a child's stride and the weight of a backpack full of peanut butter jars and a stuffed rabbit named Professor Carrots that I did not have the heart to leave behind. I'd planned the route the night before, using a street map I'd pulled from the glove compartment of my truck. The truck itself was useless. The street was blocked by 3 vehicles that had collided and then been abandoned in a configuration that suggested the drivers had left mid-impact, like the crash itself had become irrelevant halfway through. My destination was a church I'd seen from Emma's window on day 5, its roof just visible above the tree line to the northwest, roughly 9 blocks away. I'd seen people on its roof, living people, moving with intention and coordination, carrying things. Where there were organized people, there would be water. We left at first light. I carried a claw hammer in my right hand and held Emma's hand with my left. She had her backpack on. She'd insisted on bringing her crayons. I'd insisted on bringing the first aid kit, the remaining food, the camping filter I'd never used, and a flashlight with dying batteries. We were not a tactical unit. We were a mid-divorce electrician and a 6-year-old with a stuffed rabbit, walking through the middle of SE Portland on a Tuesday morning while the world rotted around us. The first 4 blocks were empty, not safe empty. There's a difference. Empty means nothing is visible. Safe means nothing is coming. I'd learned that difference on day 3 when I'd looked out the window into an empty backyard and then watched an infected person pull itself off over the back fence 30 seconds later, materializing from a stillness so complete I'd mistaken it for absence. Emma walked steadily. She didn't cry, didn't complain, didn't slow down. She held my hand and matched my pace with the focused determination of a child who understands that the adult is frightened and has decided that her job is to not make it worse. I don't know where children learn this. I don't know if they learn it at all, or if it's something structural and ancient subroutine that activates when the parent's competence visibly fails. Block 5 was where I saw the first body. I tried to steer Emma around it, but she'd already looked. She studied it for a moment, and then looked away. Not with horror, but with a kind of clinical disinterest, the way you'd look at a broken appliance on the curb. "That's not him," she said. It took me a moment to understand what she meant. She was checking, comparing, every dead face against the one she'd been drawing for 3 weeks. Block 6. The church came into view, a large structure with a slate roof, a steeple, and a sign I could now read. St. Aldhelm's Episcopal. The parking lot was ringed with vehicles arranged bumper to bumper in a rough barricade. I could see movement on the roof. Someone had hung bedsheets along the steeple railing, painted with the words "Alive" inside and a red cross. We were halfway across the parking lot when they emerged from between 2 cars to our left. 3 of them, close enough that I could see the details: the mottled skin, the involuntary jaw movement, the eyes that tracked without recognizing. One had been a woman in hospital scrubs. One had been a teenager in a Portland Timbers jersey. The third was too degraded to read. I pushed Emma behind me, raised the hammer. The one in scrubs was closest, maybe 20 feet, and it had oriented toward us with the boneless pivot that meant it had located the signal, whatever the signal was. Sound, heat, the specific electromagnetic hum of a living nervous system. I didn't know. Nobody knew. Daddy, stay behind me. Daddy, look. She wasn't looking at the infected. She was looking past them, toward the church entrance, where someone had just stepped outside. A man. Tall, thin, arms at his sides. He was wearing a long coat with large buttons and shoes that were visibly too big for his feet. His hair was short and uneven, cut with something dull. And across his chest, visible even at 40 feet, was a wound, a narrow, horizontal line just below his collarbones. Dark and open, and somehow not bleeding. He walked toward the infected, not running, not cautious, walking the way you'd walk across your own kitchen. The three of them turned toward him. The one in scrubs opened its mouth. And then they stopped. All three of them. Stopped the way a machine stops when you pull its plug, not gradually, not winding down, but full cessation. They stood motionless, their heads tilted toward the man, and they did not advance. He walked between them. They parted. He continued toward us, stepping over the curb into the parking lot, his two big shoes scuffing the asphalt. Emma let go of my hand. "That's him," she said. "That's the man." His name, he told us, was not something he could remember. The people inside the church called him John because they'd needed to call him something. And he'd responded to it without objection. He spoke clearly but slowly, with pauses in places where pauses didn't normally go, like someone reassembling a language they'd once known fluently. "You should come inside," he said. "The parking lot isn't safe after midday." I didn't move. I was staring at the wound on his chest. Up close, it was worse, a clean, lateral cut, perhaps 8 inches long. The edges dark and dry, the tissue beneath visible but inert. No blood, no drainage, no sign of healing. It looked like something that had happened to him after the systems responsible for repair had already stopped. "How did you do that?" I said. "With the three of them. How did you stop them?" He looked back at the infected, who remained motionless, standing exactly where they'd halted, their bodies locked in attitudes of interrupted pursuit. "I don't stop them. They just recognize that I'm not what they're looking for." "What are they looking for?" He considered this. Something that's still running. Emma reached up and took his hand. I almost grabbed her back. The instinct was total, electric, but she looked at me over her shoulder with that patient expression again. And I saw that his fingers had closed around hers gently, naturally, the way a person holds a child's hand when they're crossing a street together. His hand was pale and cool-looking, but structurally intact. He was not like them. He moved with coordination, spoke with intention, made eye contact that held meaning. But he was not entirely like us, either. Inside St. Aldhelm's, there were 31 people. I counted them because counting felt like control. They'd organized the nave into sleeping areas delineated by pew cushions and bed sheets hung from ropes strung between the columns. The altar had been converted into a supply station, water jugs, canned food, medical supplies, a hand crank radio. A woman named Diane was running the operation with the quiet intensity of someone who had been middle management before the outbreak and had discovered that the skill set transferred directly. "New arrivals," she said when she saw us. Not a question. "Name, number and party, any medical conditions, any skills." "Marcus, to me and my daughter, Emma." No medical conditions. I'm an electrician. Her eyebrows went up. Licensed? Journeyman. Thank God. The generator's been making a sound like a dying cat for 2 days. John brought you, I assume. He met us in the parking lot. Diane nodded in a way that suggested this was not unusual. He does that. Goes outside when someone's coming. Don't ask me how he knows. I looked across the nave. John was sitting in a pew near the side chapel, Emma beside him. She'd pulled out her crayons and was showing him the drawings. He was looking at them with an expression I couldn't decode from across the room. Attentive. Still, his head tilted slightly in a way that reminded me unsettlingly of the infected, except that his eyes held focus, held recognition, held something that approximated but maybe wasn't quite human understanding. What is he? I asked Diane. She poured water into a cup and handed it to me. We don't know. He was here when the first group arrived. The church was empty. Pastor Davies had already gone, or been taken, we're not sure which. John was sitting in the front pew. He had that wound already. He was conscious, responsive, but he didn't know his name, didn't know where he'd come from. Bobby Chen, he's a paramedic. He's the one sleeping by the baptismal font. Bobby checked his vitals on day 1. Pulse was 11 beats per minute. Body temperature was 81 degrees. Those aren't living numbers, Marcus. I drank the water. It tasted like plastic and iodine and mercy. But he's walking, talking. Yes. And the infected don't touch him. They don't touch him. More than that, they don't function near him. He's been going out on supply runs with a group of 3. As long as he's with them, the infected just stall, like he's broadcasting some kind of interference. That's not possible. Diane looked at me with an exhaustion so deep it had become its own kind of calm. Marcus, I've watched dead people walk for 9 days. I've stopped having opinions about what's possible. That night, I lay on a pew cushion on the floor of St. Aldhelm's, with Emma curled against my side, Professor Carrot's wedged between us, and I listened to 31 people breathe in the dark. And I tried to organize what I knew into something that resembled a structure. What I knew. My daughter had been drawing a specific man for 22 days. That man existed. He was in this church. He had a wound that didn't bleed and a pulse that shouldn't sustain consciousness, and the infected treated him like a null signal, a dead frequency, something that didn't register on whatever broken instrument they used to locate the living. What I didn't know, everything else, I couldn't sleep. I got up carefully, tucking the blanket around Emma, and walked to the back of the nave. The church was cold. The generator, the one Diane wanted me to fix, was running at low capacity to power a string of LED work lights along the ceiling and the radio equipment on the altar. The sound it made was indeed unhealthy. I'd diagnose it in the morning. John was standing at the rear window, looking out at the parking lot. In the LED light, his skin had a quality I hadn't noticed outside of faint translucence, like paper held near a bulb. The wound on his chest was visible above the collar of his coat, that dark, unhealing line. "Can't sleep?" he said without turning. "No. Neither can I, though I don't think I'm supposed to." I stood beside him. Outside, the parking lot was still. The 3 infected from earlier were gone, wandered off or collapsed. I didn't know which. "My daughter was drawing you," I said. "Before any of this started, 3 weeks before. The same figure every day. Gray, tall, coat, wound. She said you were coming." He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice had the same careful assembly, words placed like bricks. "I don't know why that would be." "You don't know her?" Haven't seen her before? I don't remember anything before the church. I know that I woke up in the front pew. I know the wound was already there. I know things about this building where the breaker box is, where the basement floods, that suggest I was here before. But I don't remember being here before. The continuity is missing. Bobby says your pulse is 11. Bobby is thorough. Are you dead? He turned and looked at me. His eyes were brown, unremarkable. But they had a depth of focus that made me feel like I was being read rather than seen. I don't think the word means what it used to. I didn't respond. I looked out the window. Somewhere in the distance, maybe 10 blocks east, a building was burning. The orange glow pulsed against the low clouds. My wife is out there somewhere, I said. Rachel. She left before the lockdown. I haven't heard from her. I'm sorry. If I asked you to help me find her, would you? Yes. Why? Because your daughter asked me to before you did. The floor shifted under me. Not literally, the church was solid, stone and timber, built to last. But the architecture of my understanding shifted because he'd said it simply as a fact. And Emma had been sitting with him for less than an hour. And I hadn't heard her say anything about Rachel. And the implication was either that he was lying or that the connection between my daughter and this half-dead man operated on a frequency I could not access. I went back to my pew cushion. I lay down next to Emma. She was holding a crayon in her sleep, the gray one, worn to a nub. I didn't sleep at all. Over the next 4 days, I fixed the generator, rewired the LED circuit to reduce load, and installed a manual cutoff switch that Diane could reach from the altar without crossing the nave in the dark. Useful work. Measurable work. The kind of work that let me believe I was earning our place while I tried to decide what to do about a man whose vital signs belonged to a corpse and whose existence my daughter had predicted with crayons. The church operated on a system that Diane had built from instinct and middle management discipline. Morning head count. Water distribution at 8, noon, and 6. Supply teams of 3 going out every other day, always with John. Waste management in the church basement, where Bobby had set up a crude latrine using the old boiler drain. Everyone had a role. Mine became infrastructure. A man named Gil, former UPS driver, handled perimeter. A woman named Sarah, who'd been a veterinary tech, handled medical alongside Bobby. 2 teenagers, Malik and his sister Kesha, managed food inventory with a precision that suggested they'd been keeping their own household together long before the outbreak. I watched John. I watched him the way a person watches a structural anomaly in a building, not with fear, exactly, but with the fixed attention of someone who knows that if the anomaly fails, everything above it comes down. He went outside every day. Sometimes he stood in the parking lot for an hour, motionless, facing the street. Sometimes he walked to the barricade line and looked out between the vehicles. The infected would appear singles, pairs, occasionally a group of 5 or 6, and they would approach the church, and then they would stop. Every time. They'd reach a distance of roughly 30 feet from John, and their motion would cease, their bodies locking into that terrible frozen posture, heads tilted, jaws slack. They'd stand there for minutes, sometimes hours. Then they'd turn and drift away, as if they'd forgotten what had drawn them. Bobby called it the radius. He'd been tracking it with tape marks on the asphalt, measuring the distance at which the infected stalled. 32 feet, consistently. He told me this while checking Emma's ears for an infection she'd been complaining about. 32 feet. Never 31, never 33. That's not behavior, Marcus. That's a broadcast range. You think he's transmitting something? I think whatever the infection responds to bioelectric signal, pheromone. I don't know, he's producing a dead version of it. A zero signal. They get within range and their targeting system hits a wall of nothing. That doesn't explain why he's conscious. Why he talks, thinks, makes decisions. Bobby shined a light in Emma's left ear. No, it doesn't. I've examined him 4 times. His tissue is intact, but metabolically inert. He doesn't eat. I've never seen him drink water. His wound doesn't heal, but it doesn't degrade either. He's in some kind of stasis, functional stasis. He's what the infection does to a body, minus the aggression, minus the hunger. Whatever drive makes them pursue the living, he doesn't have it. So he's infected. He's something. I don't have a word for it, and I went to medical school. Emma, whose ear was apparently fine, had been listening. He's what's left over, she said. I told Daddy already. Bobby looked at me. I shrugged. He did not look reassured. That afternoon, John went out with a supply team, Gil, Sarah, and a quiet man named Orrin, who never spoke about his life before and whom I'd learned not to ask. They were gone for 3 hours. They came back with 2 cases of bottled water, a bag of canned goods from a looted Safeway, and a car battery that I could wire into the solar panel Sarah had pulled from a house on Hawthorne. They also came back with a woman named Luz and her 12-year-old son, Miguel. Luz had a broken wrist, and Miguel had the stare, that flat, 1,000-yard expression that meant he'd seen something specific and terrible, and his mind had responded by shutting the aperture down, to a pinhole. I'd seen the stare on 3 other people in the church. I'd seen it in my own bathroom mirror on day 4. Luz told Diane they'd been hiding in a Fred Meyer stockroom for 6 days. The infected had found them that morning. She and Miguel had gotten out and through a loading dock and run until Gil's team found them. The man, Luz said, pointing at John. He walked right up to the ones chasing us, and they stopped. They just stopped, like someone pressed pause. What is he? Diane handed her a cup of water. He's ours. That's what matters. That was the answer everyone in St. Aldhelms had settled on. Not an explanation, a claim. He's ours. He keeps us alive. Don't examine it too closely. I couldn't stop examining it, because my daughter had known. Before any of this, before the outbreak, before the dead walked, before the word infected entered civilian vocabulary, a 6-year-old girl with a gray crayon had drawn this man into existence day after day after day, and nobody could tell me why. On day 6 at the church, Emma asked if she could go outside with John. No. But he said I could. I don't care what he said. You stay inside. She looked at me with a frustration I recognized from Rachel, a specific tightening around the mouth that meant I was being irrational, but she hadn't yet decided whether to fight about it or just wait me out. Daddy, the outside ones don't come near him. I know that. So it's safe. It's safe near him. It's not safe near the edges of wherever whatever it is stops working. You stay inside. She went to the side chapel and drew. I felt like a reasonable parent and an unreasonable person simultaneously, which I suspect is the permanent condition of parenting. That evening, Rachel's voice came through the radio. It wasn't a direct transmission. The hand-crank radio could receive but not send on most frequencies. What we heard was a relay, someone broadcasting a list of names from what sounded like an organized shelter. People requesting contact with specific individuals. The broadcaster read names and locations in a steady monotone, one every few seconds. I was sitting near the altar helping Diane update the inventory log when the voice said, "Rachel Adler, looking for Marcus and Emma Adler, last known Southeast Portland. I dropped the pencil. Diane grabbed my arm. That's my wife. That's Rachel. The broadcast continued. More names. Then a frequency and a time for responses and a location. Gresham Emergency Coordination Center, Gresham High School. Gresham. She was at her sister's. She'd made it to some kind of organized shelter. She was alive, and she was looking for us. I stood up. I looked across the church. John was sitting in his usual pew, Emma beside him, both of them looking at me. Emma's face was bright. She'd heard it too. "Mommy," she said. John said nothing. He watched me with those brown eyes that read instead of saw. And I felt, for the first time, something I couldn't immediately name. Not suspicion, not fear. Something closer to the feeling you get when you realize that two separate systems you've been monitoring are actually connected, that the electrical and the plumbing run through the same wall. And what happens to one will happen to the other. "I need to go to Gresham," I said to Diane. "That's 12 miles. "I know." "Through open territory." "I know." "You'd need John." There it was. The thing I'd been circling for 6 days. Every supply run, every rescue, every expedition outside the church walls required John. His radius was the only safe passage any of us had. And taking him to Gresham meant leaving 31 people without their only protection for however long the trip required. "I'll talk to him," I said. "You'll talk to everyone," Diane said. "This isn't your decision, Marcus. This is a community resource." She was right. And I hated her for being right in the calm, organized way she was right about everything. I went to find John. He was already standing. "You heard?" I said. "I heard. Will you go with me?" "I said I would, when you asked the first night." "Diane says we need to discuss it with the group." "Yes. But I can tell you that I'll go regardless of what the group decides. You asked. Your daughter asked before that. And I don't think I'm here to stand in a parking lot forever." It was the most words I'd heard him speak at once. His voice had the same assembled quality, bricks laid carefully, but there was something in it now that sounded almost like urgency. Like he was remembering, in fragments, what it felt like to want something. The meeting happened that night. Diane stood at the altar. I stood beside her. John stood in the back, arms at his sides, always at his sides, and 31 faces turned toward us in the LED-lit dark. Diane laid it out plainly. Rachel's broadcast, the distance to Gresham, the necessity of John's presence, the risk to the church during his absence. Gil spoke first. "How long would you be gone?" "If we move fast, there and back in a day," I said. "We leave at dawn, we're back by nightfall." "And if you're not?" "Then you barricade the doors and stay quiet. The infected don't know the church is occupied if John's not here broadcasting his signal. They come toward him. Without him, this is just a building. Bobby, back me up." Bobby stood. He's probably right. The infected we've observed are drawn to living signals. Without John acting as a 0 point, the church won't attract them specifically. Your risk goes up. You can't go outside, can't make noise, can't run the generator. But passive survival inside a locked stone building is feasible for 24 hours. Keisha raised her hand. "What if something goes wrong and you're gone longer than a day?" I didn't have an answer for that. Diane did. Then we survived the way people survived before John. Quietly, carefully, the way most of the world is surviving right now. The vote was informal. Diane asked for objections. Gil objected. Orrin objected. Luz abstained. 27 people out of 31 gave some form of assent, nods, raised hands, murmured okays. The math was clear. But I noticed the quality of the assent was thin, given not with generosity, but with the grim understanding that they would want the same thing if their names came through the radio. I spent the rest of the night preparing. Food for 2 days, water, the hammer, a map that Gil had annotated with streets he knew were impassable and buildings he'd marked as hot places where the infected congregated in numbers. Emma was asleep. I knelt beside her and watched her breathe. John appeared beside me. I hadn't heard him approach. I never heard him approach. "She should stay," he said. "I know. The trip is dangerous. My radius is reliable, but if we're separated, if something forces us apart, I can't protect you both from a distance." "I know. She stays with Diane. I already talked to her about it." He knelt beside me. Up close, the wound on his chest was a door into something I didn't want to see, dark, dry, not flesh exactly, but not flesh. A boundary between two states of matter that shouldn't coexist in a single body. "Marcus?" "Yeah. Your daughter sees things, not the future. Something more like the shape of what's necessary. She drew me because I was necessary. She stopped drawing me when I arrived because the necessity had been fulfilled. Do you understand?" "Not really." "She hasn't drawn anything new in 6 days. She only draws when something is coming. If she starts again, pay attention. It will be important." I wanted to argue with him. I wanted to say that my daughter was a 6-year-old with crayons, not an oracle, not a prophet, not a tool for navigating whatever grotesque new physics the world was operating under. But I'd watched her draw him into existence across 22 consecutive days, and then watched him step out of a church and stop the dead in their tracks, and I had no ground left to stand on. "I'll pay attention," I said. He touched Emma's head. Just once, briefly, his pale fingers resting against her hair for a moment. She didn't stir. We left at dawn. The first 3 miles were manageable. John walked slightly ahead, his 2 big shoes scuffing the pavement with a rhythm that became, over time, a kind of metronome. I matched my pace to his. We moved down SE Division, past the burned-out storefronts and the cars that had become geography permanent, rusted, already starting to look like they'd always been there. The infected were present but sparse, singles mostly, standing in that motionless way they adopted when they weren't tracking anything. When we passed within John's radius, they'd lock up that full-body stall, heads tilting, jaws stopping mid-chew on nothing. We'd walk past them like museum visitors walking past statues, except the statues turned to follow us with dead eyes and resumed their wandering once we'd gone. I kept expecting to feel frightened. I was not exactly frightened. I was operating in the register beyond fright, the one where the body has accepted the situation and is now simply processing it with the mechanical focus of a person doing a dangerous job they've done before. I'd never done this before. But the body didn't seem to care about accuracy. It cared about function. John didn't speak for the first hour. When he did, it was unexpected. "You and Rachel, you were separating." "How do you know that?" "Emma told me." "She told you a lot, apparently." Children tell things to people they trust. She trusts me. I don't fully understand why, but I don't think understanding is required. We turned south on 82nd. The avenue was wider and more exposed, but also more direct. Gil's map showed it clear of major concentrations until the Powell intersection, where he'd drawn a large red X and written the word bad. "Were you going to reconcile?" John asked. "I don't know. We hadn't gotten that far. We were still in the part where you argue about who gets the good blender." I don't remember having a family, but I think I did There's a shape where one was. Like a hole in a floor, you can see the outline of what the boards used to support. I glanced at him. His expression hadn't changed. It rarely did. But there was something in his voice. Not sadness, exactly, but the echo of where sadness had been. A resonance in an empty room. We reached Powell. Gill's red X was justified. The intersection was dense, 15, maybe 20 infected, milling in a loose herd, centered around what appeared to be the remains of a bus. They'd surrounded it, pressing against the windows, drawn by something inside that I could not see and did not want to see. The sound they made was not what you'd expect, not moaning, not growling. A low, continuous exhalation, like wind through a broken window, like the sound a body makes when all its air leaves at once, except it didn't stop. "We go through?" I asked. "We go through." John walked forward. I stayed closer than I'd been, near enough to smell him, which was not decay, but absence, like standing near a stone. He crossed into the intersection, and the effect rippled outward from his body in real time. The nearest infected stalled. Then the next ring, then the next, like dropping a pebble of nothing into a pond of signal. One by one they locked up. 20 corrupted bodies freezing mid-motion in a circle that expanded exactly as John moved through it. And I walked in his wake through a tunnel of stillness, with my hammer raised and my teeth clenched so tight, my jaw ached for an hour afterward. We cleared the intersection. Behind us, I could hear them reactivate, that exhalation resuming, the shuffling starting again. John didn't look back. I did. I couldn't help it. "Don't," he said. "Looking back is for people who think they might have to go that way again. We're not going that way again." Mile 4, mile 5. The neighborhoods thinned. More houses, fewer commercial buildings, more fences, more yards, more blind corners. Twice John stopped walking and held up a hand, and I stopped behind him. And we stood in silence while something moved through an adjacent yard, invisible behind a hedge, its passage marked only by the sound of footsteps on grass and the faint, broken rhythm of that exhalation. At mile 6, we found the barricade. Someone had built a wall across 82nd using city buses parked end to end. Their tires slashed to lower them, their interiors filled with dirt and debris to add mass. The gaps between buses had been sealed with chain-link fencing and plywood. It was crude but serious, the work of people who'd committed to a perimeter and followed through. Spray painted on the side of the nearest bus in letters 3 feet tall: Gresham Safe Zone. Entry at Stark Street. Checkpoint. We followed the barricade east to Stark. The checkpoint was manned, actually manned, with living people standing behind a gap in the buses, holding weapons that ranged from hunting rifles to baseball bats. A heavy-set man in a rain jacket was clearly in charge. He stepped forward when he saw us approaching. "Names: Marcus Adler. This is John. Last name? He doesn't have one." The man looked at John. I watched his face go through the calculation, the pallor, the wound, the way John stood with that absolute stillness. "Is he sick?" "No. He looks sick. He's not infected, if that's what you're asking. He's something else." "Something else isn't an answer I can work with." John spoke. "I'm not a threat to your people. I can demonstrate this, but the demonstration would require the presence of infected individuals, which I assume you'd prefer to avoid." The man stared. Then he turned to a woman behind him. "Get Alderman." We waited. Alderman turned out to be a tall black woman in her 50s, with the bearing of someone who had been making decisions on insufficient information for so long that it had become a form of expertise. She came to the checkpoint, assessed John for roughly 15 seconds, and said, "You're the one from the church." "Word travels," John said. "Radio travels. Your people at St. Aldhelm's have been broadcasting supply requests for 3 days. They mention a man who can walk through the infected. I assumed it was exaggeration." She studied the wound. "I see it's not." She led us through. Inside the safe zone, Gresham had been transformed into something that resembled organized society, in the way a field hospital resembles a hospital. The form was there. The substance was improvised. Tents along the streets, cook fires in parking lots, a medical station in the high school gym, a communication hub in what had been the main office, where 6 hand-crank radios and a battery-powered shortwave filled the room with a static-laced murmur of 100 distant voices. "Rachel Adler," I said to the woman running the comm station. She broadcast a message looking for me. The woman checked a handwritten log, flipped pages, ran her finger down a list. "Adler, Rachel. Arrived day 3 via the I-84 corridor. She's in Building C, the elementary school." I was already moving when John put his hand on my arm. His grip was gentle but certain. "Marcus, go. I need to speak with Alderman." "About what?" "About the radius. About what I can do for this place. Go find your wife. Your daughter asked me to bring you here. You're here." I went. Building C was a brick elementary school 2 blocks from the high school. Inside, the classrooms had been converted to dormitories, 8 to 10 people per room, sleeping on gym mats and folded clothing. I walked the hallways reading names written on masking tape beside each door. Room 4, Room 7, Room 12. My heart was doing something architectural, building pressure against walls that weren't designed for it. Room 14, Adler R. Was written on a strip of masking tape in handwriting I recognized. Her handwriting. The same handwriting that had written me a note last Christmas saying she needed space, and would I please not follow her to Jenny's. The same handwriting that had signed Emma's permission slip for the zoo field trip. Small, precise, slightly left-leaning. I opened the door. She was sitting on a gym mat by the window. She'd lost weight. Her hair was pulled back in a way that showed how thin her face had become. She was holding a paperback book, but not reading it. Just holding it. The way you hold something to prove your hands still work. "Rachel." She looked up. "I have been an electrician for 11 years. I understand circuits. I understand that current flows through a path of least resistance, and that when you complete a circuit, the energy has somewhere to go and the system functions." When she looked up and saw me, I felt a circuit complete not between us as partners, not as husband and wife, not even as 2 people who loved each other, because I didn't know anymore if we did, but as 2 parents of the same child, the current running through Emma, always through Emma, and the system suddenly functioning again after weeks of open wires. "Emma?" she said. The first word, not my name, our daughter's. "She's safe. She's at a church in Southeast. She's safe, Rachel." She stood up. She crossed the room. She put her face against my chest and held on. And I held her. And we stood like that for a long time. And it was not romance, and it was not reconciliation. It was 2 halves of a broken circuit, touching long enough for the current to pass through. We left Gresham the next morning. Rachel, me, and John. Alderman had asked John to stay. She'd made her case logically. The safe zone had 600 people. The church had 31. The utilitarian math was clear. John had listened with his characteristic patience and then said, "I'll come back." but I have to return them to their daughter first. Alderman hadn't argued. I think she recognized something in John that didn't respond to argument, not stubbornness, but a kind of directional certainty, like a compass needle that acknowledges the existence of other directions while continuing to point north. Rachel walked between us. She was stronger than she looked. She'd survived 10 days in the safe zone after surviving 3 days alone on I-84. And she'd done it without the benefit of a dead man's radius, or a stone church, or a daughter's crayon prophecies. She'd done it with her own 2 hands, and her own decision-making, and a stubbornness I'd once resented, and now understood as the thing that had kept her alive. We didn't talk about the divorce. We didn't talk about custody or assets or the lease that expired in August. We talked about Emma. We talked about her drawings. I told Rachel everything. The gray man, the 22 days, the way Emma had identified John on sight, the things John had said about Emma seeing shapes of necessity. Rachel listened with an expression I knew well, the one she wore when she was processing information that contradicted her model of the world and deciding whether to update the model or reject the data. "She takes after your mother," Rachel said finally. That woman always knew when someone was going to call before the phone rang. That's not the same thing. Maybe it's the same thing at a different scale. John walked ahead of us, his radius clearing the path. The return trip was faster. We knew the route, knew the danger points, moved with the efficiency of people who had a destination they actually wanted to reach. At the Powell intersection, the herd had thinned to 7. John walked through them like a door walking through a room. Rachel watched with her mouth slightly open. 11 beats per minute, I said. 81 degrees, no blood from the wound. But he thinks, he feels. I don't know what he feels. He says things that suggest feeling, but his body is running on hardware that shouldn't sustain consciousness. Bobby says he's impossible. And yet, mile 3, mile 2. The church came into view, the steeple rising above the trees like a finger pointing at a sky that didn't have answers either. I could see the bed sheets on the railing, alive inside. The front doors opened as we approached. Diane came out. Behind her, Gil, Bobby, Sarah, Malik, Kesha. They'd survived the night without John, quiet, dark, barricaded, 24 hours of holding their breath. They looked at us the way divers look at the surface. Then Emma. She came through the doors at a run. Not toward me, not toward Rachel. Toward both of us, her arms out, a collision of 6-year-old force that hit us at knee level and held on. Rachel dropped to the ground and wrapped herself around our daughter and made a sound I'd never heard from her. Not crying, not laughing, but some frequency between the two that the human voice produces only when the distance between the worst thing you imagined and the thing that actually happened becomes measurable and survivable. I looked at John. He was standing at the edge of the parking lot, arms at his sides, watching us. The wound on his chest was the same dark, open, unchanging. But his expression had shifted. Something that wasn't quite a smile, but occupied the same territory. Recognition, maybe. The recognition of a pattern completing a family redrawn, a circuit closing, a shape of necessity fulfilled. Emma pulled back from Rachel and looked up at me. "I drew something new last night," she said. My stomach dropped. The drawing was on the floor of the side chapel, beside her sleeping bag, weighed down with a hymnal. I picked it up and held it under the LED light and felt the ground shift again, that architectural displacement, that sense of load-bearing walls discovering they were standing on something other than what they'd assumed. Wasn't the gray man. It was a building. Not the church, something larger, something with a flat roof and many windows and a shape I recognized as institutional. A school. Around the school, She'd drawn dozens of small figures in crayon. Some were the dark scribbled shapes she used for the infected, the black tangles. But others were colored normally. People. Living people. And in the center of the school's flat roof, she'd drawn a circle with lines radiating outward from it. A signal. A broadcast. And inside the circle, she'd drawn the gray man. What is this, Bug? It's what happens next. Rachel was standing behind me. She looked at the drawing over my shoulder, and I could feel her processing, updating, the model stretching to accommodate data it wasn't built for. That's the Gresham School, Rachel said. The elementary school. Building C, where I was staying. She was right. The proportions were wrong. Emma was 6, but the shape was there. The flat roof, the rows of windows, the general massing. What happens at the school? I asked Emma. He goes there, and the circle gets bigger. The circle? You mean the area around him where the infected stop? She nodded. It gets really big. Big enough for the whole place. I looked at John. He'd followed us into the chapel and was standing in the doorway, looking at the drawing with an expression I could now read better than I could a week ago. Not surprise, recognition. The same recognition I'd seen in the parking lot. A pattern completing, a shape becoming visible. You knew, I said. I didn't know, but I felt the direction. The same way your daughter does, I think. Something in us is tuned to the same signal. She sees it visually. I feel it as a pull. Alderman asked you to stay. You said you'd come back. Yes. You knew you'd go back. Before Emma drew it, you knew. I knew I wasn't finished. I didn't know the shape of what was next. Now I do. I sat down in a pew. The wood was cold and solid and old. This church had been here for over 100 years. People had come here with problems they couldn't solve: grief, fear, confusion, the need for pattern and chaos. And they'd sat in these pews and asked for something they couldn't name. And sometimes the asking itself had been enough, because it organized the chaos into a shape that could be carried. What does she mean the circle gets bigger? John sat beside me. This close, I could feel the absence of heat from his body, not cold exactly, but a null space where warmth should have been. I think it means what it sounds like. The radius expands. I felt it growing already. Bobby's 32 feet. That was accurate on day 1. I think it's 37 or 38 now. I don't know the mechanism. I don't know if it has a limit. But in a place with enough infrastructure, enough people, enough reason to stay, I think it could grow large enough to cover a meaningful area. A safe zone. A permanent one. Not barricades and bus walls. Something intrinsic. Something that comes from the signal itself. I thought about Gresham. 600 people behind a barricade that was only as good as its weakest point. Aldermen making decisions with insufficient information. The comm station, those 100 distant voices. What would it mean to give them a radius not 32 feet or 38, but a quarter mile, a half mile, a boundary that the infected simply could not cross? What does it cost you? I asked. The radius, the expansion. What does it take? He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice had that careful assembly, but slower now, like the bricks were heavier. I think it takes whatever I have left, whatever's running the consciousness. The body will persist. It doesn't need me for that. But the talking, the thinking, the part that sits here and tells you about it. He paused. I think that part is the fuel. The chapel went quiet. You're saying it'll kill you, Rachel said from behind us. She'd been listening. She had her arms crossed, and her voice had the edge it got when she was confronting something she intended to fight, whether or not fighting was an option. I'm saying I'm not sure I'm alive in a way that can be killed. I'm saying there's a resource being spent. And the more the radius expands, the more it costs. I don't know where the account runs dry. I don't know what I'll be afterward. You might just stop, I said. I might just stop. Emma had come in. She was standing beside Rachel, holding the drawing. And she was looking at John with an expression I finally understood, because I'd seen it on her face once before the day I'd told her we were giving away the family dog because the landlord had changed the pet policy. Understanding. Premature grief. The terrible clarity of a child who sees the loss before the adults have finished negotiating with it. You don't have to, she said. John looked at her. And for the first time, his face showed something unambiguous, not an echo, not a resonance, not an approximation. Tenderness. Actual, legible tenderness. I know, he said. That's why it means something. We left 3 days later. John, Rachel, me, and after a furious argument, I lost Emma. She refused to stay at the church. I tried reason, authority, bribery, and the nuclear option of asking Diane to physically prevent her from leaving. Diane looked at me, looked at Emma, and said, Marcus, I've managed a lot of people in my career, and I've learned that some decisions aren't mine to override. So we went, all 4 of us. Gil came too, and Bobby, and Orrin, who still didn't talk about his past, but who had revealed a talent for quiet, efficient violence when the route required it. 7 people walking 12 miles through a dead city, a tall gray man at the front, a 6-year-old at the center holding a stuffed rabbit and a box of crayons. The rest of us arranged around her like a living barricade, supplementing a dead man's radius. The trip was harder this time. The infected were thicker on the Eastern approach word, or signal, or whatever navigational system they used, had apparently identified Gresham as a concentration of living bodies, and they were migrating toward it. John's radius held, but I could see what it cost him. His pace was slower. His pauses were longer. Twice he stopped walking entirely, standing in the street with his eyes closed. And the infected at the edge of his range swayed like grass in a wind that had suddenly died. John, I said the second time. He opened his eyes. I'm fine. The field is just thicker, more of them pressing against it. It requires more. More of whatever he was spending, more of the dwindling account. We reached the Gresham barricade at mid-afternoon. Alderman was waiting. She'd been told by radio that we were coming. She looked at our group, looked at John, and nodded. I cleared the school roof, she said. I don't know what you need, but it's ready. John walked through the checkpoint. The infected nearest the barricade, a line of them pressed against the buses, drawn by the 600 living signals inside, stalled as he passed. The stalling spread outward from him like a ripple. 20 feet, 30, 40. I counted. The ripple reached the outermost infected, and they locked. Every one of them, motionless. A silent cordon of frozen bodies ringing the barricade. Alderman stared. How far is that? Wider than before, Bobby said. He was pacing the distance, counting steps. 60 feet, maybe 65. He's growing. John walked to the elementary school. Building C. He went inside. He climbed the stairs. We followed him to the roof, all of us, Alderman included, ascending into the gray Portland light where you could see the safe zone spread out below, the tents and cook fires and 600 people who had survived by bus walls and stubbornness and the dumb luck of being inside a perimeter when it closed. He walked to the center of the roof. He stood there, arms at his sides, eyes open, looking out at a city that had ended and might, if the drawing was right, begin again. Emma held my hand. Rachel held my other hand. We stood at the roof's edge and watched. Nothing dramatic happened. There was no light, no sound, no visible discharge. John simply stood there, and the radius expanded. You could track it only by its effect, watching the infected at the barricade line, already frozen, and then seeing the stillness spread to the ones beyond. The ones in the streets a block away. 2 blocks. 3. Figures locking up in sequential waves, like a stadium crowd doing the reverse of a wave. Sitting down row by row, Bobby had binoculars. 400 feet, 500, it's not stopping. John's hands opened. His fingers spread, the way Emma had drawn them in those first pictures, holding something invisible apart. His mouth moved slightly. I don't think he was speaking. I think he was spending the last of whatever currency his consciousness was denominated in. And the motion of his mouth was the receipt. "A quarter mile," Bobby said. His voice was cracked. The entire north sector just went still. Emma let go of my hand. She walked toward John. I reached for her, but Rachel held me back. Her grip on my arm, the same grip she'd used during labor, absolute, non-negotiable. The grip of a person who has decided that this moment must be allowed to proceed. Emma stood in front of John. She looked up at him. He looked down at her. "Thank you," she said. His mouth stopped moving. His eyes focused on her, that depth of reading, that full attention, and he said, very quietly, in a voice that sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well that was slowly filling with silence, "Draw something good." Then his eyes closed. His body didn't fall. It remained standing, arms extended, fingers spread, as still as the infected he'd frozen, but utterly different, not locked, not stalled, but settled, like a building whose foundation had finally accepted the full weight it was designed to bear. Bobby lowered the binoculars. "Half mile. The radius is holding it half a mile. Nothing inside it is moving. Nothing infected, I mean." Alderman looked at the city below, at the frozen infected, at the clear, silent space expanding around a dead man standing on a school roof with his arms open. "Is he?" "I don't know," Bobby said. "I don't know what he was. I don't know what this is." Emma came back to me. I picked her up. She put her head on my shoulder, and she was warm, alive, 6 years old, holding a gray crayon she'd pulled from her pocket like a talisman. "Is he gone?" I asked her. Because she would know. If anyone knew, she would know. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He's not gone. He's just all the way open." We stayed in Gresham. Rachel and I are still together, not reconciled, exactly, but connected through the circuit that runs through our daughter. The radius held. It's been 4 months. The infected inside the half-mile perimeter remain frozen. And Alderman's teams have been clearing them systematically, carefully, like removing fallen trees after a storm. Outside the perimeter, the world is still broken. But inside it, people have started planting gardens. A school opened last week. Someone fixed the water system. John still stands on the roof. His body hasn't changed, same wound, same posture, same open hands. Bobby checks on him weekly. Pulse, 0. Temperature, ambient. The radius, stable. Emma doesn't draw the gray man anymore. She draws flowers, houses, cats with improbable numbers of legs. She draws the way a 6-year-old should draw, loose, happy, scribbling. Sometimes she looks up toward the school roof and waves. I asked her once if she thinks he can see her. She said, "He's not looking, Daddy. He's holding." I'm an electrician. I understand circuits. I understand that some systems require a continuous input to maintain their output, and that the input is consumed in the process, and that this is not a tragedy, but a function. The light stays on because something is spent. The radius holds because someone chose to stand still. I keep the drawings. All of them. 22 days of gray crayon on white paper, pinned to the wall of our new room in the school basement. People ask about them. I tell them the truth, which is the only thing I have that's worth anything. My daughter drew the shape of what was necessary. And it came, and it held, and it holds.